Hey everyone, and welcome. So we're going to tackle a word today that you hear everywhere, woke. But what does it actually mean when we start talking about books? You know, from Shakespeare all the way to the latest bestseller. We're going to dig into how this one little idea is changing not just what we read, but maybe more importantly, how we read. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we have to pin down what woke even means. We'll look at its roots. Then, we'll see what happens when we use that idea as a lens to look at the classics. After that, we'll check out authors who are writing with these ideas in mind from the get-go, unpack the big debate happening right now, and finally, we'll ask, what does this all mean for the books sitting on our own shelves?
And this is really the big question, isn't it? When you take this very modern-sounding term and you smash it up against the timeless world of books, what actually happens? Let's find out.
All right, first things first. To really get a grip on how this affects literature, we have to understand the word itself. And to do that, we need to go back to where it all started.
So the term woke didn't just pop up out of thin air. It has these really deep roots in 20th century African-American communities. Originally, it meant being aware of, or literally awake to, the real lived experiences of racial and social injustice. It was basically a call to be conscious of the world around you.
Now, what's really fascinating is watching this idea evolve over time. It started back in the 1920s with a sharp focus on racial injustice. But by the middle of the century, that lens got wider, right? It started to include things like gender inequality and class struggles. And then, in more recent decades, it's just kept expanding to cover colonialism, LGBTQ+ rights, even environmental justice. It went from a specific kind of awareness to this really broad way of looking at power and inequality.
Okay, so we've got this modern framework. What happens when we take it and apply it to stories that were written way, way before the term woke was even a thing?
And this is the perfect way to think about it. The idea isn't to go back and rewrite these classic books or to say they're bad. It's more like putting on a new pair of glasses. It lets you see the same old story you've always known, but from a totally different angle. It helps you ask new questions and maybe see some layers that were there all along, just hidden in plain sight.
Let's make this real with an example we all know: Pride and Prejudice. Traditionally, we see it as this great romance, right? Love conquers social class. But if you put on those new glasses, you start asking different questions. The plot is no longer just about marriage. It's about how women had to navigate these incredibly restrictive power structures. And you start to wonder, whose voices are we not hearing in this version of society? Suddenly, a simple love story becomes this complex look at how money and power shape literally every choice a person can make.
And this applies all over the place, not just with Jane Austen. With a book like Huckleberry Finn, it pushes us to wrestle with its really difficult language while also seeing its powerful critique of slavery. Or with To Kill a Mockingbird, it might make us ask critical questions about representation, like whose perspective is really at the center of this story about racial injustice. And with Shakespeare, wow, you can re-examine plays like Othello or The Tempest and see all these new layers about colonialism, race, and power. It just encourages a much deeper, more active way of reading.
And that really gets to the heart of it. The point here isn't to cancel these books. The goal is to move beyond just passively accepting them. It's about becoming an active, thoughtful reader who's asking questions. Who has the power in this story? Whose voice gets to be heard? And just as importantly, whose gets silenced? Okay, let's switch gears a bit. We've been talking about applying a modern lens to old books. But what about authors who intentionally wrote their stories with these very ideas baked in from the start?
In the 20th century, you see these amazing authors who were true trailblazers. Think about Toni Morrison's Beloved, which gives a voice to the profound trauma of slavery that was so often left out of the history books. Or Alice Walker's The Color Purple, which just masterfully explores where race and gender oppression crash into each other. Even someone like George Orwell with 1984, he was fundamentally writing a critique of power, propaganda, and social control. These authors weren't just telling a good yarn, they were taking apart the systems around them.
And that tradition is absolutely alive and well today. You've got contemporary authors like Angie Thomas, Kylie Reid, and Ocean Vuong who are putting these themes right at the center of their work. They're using fiction to talk directly about some of the biggest social questions of our time, turning literature into this powerful space for conversation and for understanding each other.
Now, of course, looking at books this way is not something everyone agrees on. And this brings us right into the middle of the modern debate, a debate that's really about the purpose of art itself.
The debate really boils down to two different ways of looking at things. On one side, supporters argue that this lens makes literature more inclusive, more relevant. It gives readers the tools to question the world and learn from people whose lives are different from their own. But on the other side, you have critics who worry that this approach can turn into a kind of moral checklist for art. They're concerned it could stifle creative freedom or value a social message more than the actual quality of the writing. Both sides are asking really fundamental questions about what art is for.
So, after digging into the history, its application to books, and the big debate around it, where does all this leave us? Let's try to pull it all together for one final thought.
At the end of the day, this whole conversation isn't really about erasing or rewriting history. It's about making it richer. It's about saying that every generation can, and maybe even should, bring new questions to old stories. It turns reading from this passive thing you do into an active process of rethinking the world.
And so that leaves us with a really big question to think about. Is there more value in re-examining these classic stories through our modern social lens, or should we try to preserve them exactly as they were, understanding them only in their original context? It's a fascinating question about our relationship with the stories that make us who we are. Thanks so much for joining me.